Well, we knew something was up with this planet, and episode 2, titled Red Sun Rising, pulled back the curtain just a little bit, giving us the tiniest glimpse behind the mysteries of Sanctum. The show opens with a flashback scene from when the group from Eligius III, the initial inhabitants of the planet, first arrived. The scene follows Josephine Lightborn, the leader of the mission's daughter, and we get a good look at some of the backstory of the mission, who the Lightborns are, and most importantly what the deal is with the mysterious affliction caused by the eclipse. It's clearly set during the first instance of the eclipse, since no one seems to have any inkling that something bad was about to happen. Josephine's father goes on the warpath, shooting random people and hurting both Josephine and her mother.
Sanctum is mine!
Now, it's clear that Josephine isn't killed from this attack, because she was the one who wrote the book Clark found about the affliction. She literally wrote the book on the murder disease. Anyway, we now know what happened during the very first instance of the eclipse, and it wasn't pretty. I'm sure there will be more info in the later episodes, but I'm happy we're actually getting to see some of the events of Sanctum's past. Meanwhile, back on the ground, the crew prepares to deal with the affliction without knowing anything about it. Literally anything could happen, so they decide the best course of action is to chain themselves up using the restraints they found last episode and ride it out. It's also a good opportunity for exposition. Murphy and Clark have a bit of a verbal sparring match about what Clark has done.
What the hell do you want from me, Murphy? I'm sorry, okay? For all of it. I never meant for you to get hurt. But no matter what I do, someone always does. Is that what you want to hear? That I'm the bad guy? Fine, I'll be the bad guy. When I'm in charge, people die.
She did have to do a lot of backstabbing and betrayal that, given the context behind what we've seen of these acts, can be justified in the end. We as an audience know that Clark means well and is doing her best to make sure as many people get out of this alive as reasonably possible. She knew it was risky to essentially throw Echo, Murphy, Raven, and Shaw to the wolves when she handed them to McCreary, but there were more cards in play than that. Nothing is ever as straightforward as it seems in the world of the 100, and Clark knows that. Sure, people die as a result of her decisions, but there have been many times that she pretty much saved the human race. Clark knows things are gray and leads accordingly. It's a stark contrast to Octavia, who very much has a black and white style of leadership.
You are one crew, or you are the enemy of one crew. Choose!
Both have their benefits and faults, but it's Clark who always seems to have to deal with people questioning her decisions. Exactly like Murphy does in this scene, but Clark isn't having any of it. She knows that her track record hasn't been and never will be perfect, and she will have to bear the burden of the lives lost at her hand, which is something this episode touches on later. Next, we need to talk about everyone going crazy. First of all, I really like the camera work for the people who are afflicted. Close-up handheld shots with a crazy yellow-orange filter over it really made it feel unique. Now, I have a theory about what exactly was happening when everyone was being afflicted, from a narrative standpoint. I think that the eclipse causes anyone who's exposed to experience their most powerful fears much more powerfully. Amori's greatest fear could be that Murphy hurts or abandons her, so she is compelled to eliminate Murphy to keep that from happening. Miller and Jackson's greatest fear was being back on Earth in the desert with the sandworms. Miller even says that he doesn't want to end up like Obika, which to me has more meaning than just the worms.
Right before they reach my torso, I can't die like Obika!
They're both afraid of things being like they were, which might explain why Jackson started cutting into Miller's flesh, representing the flesh they ate. Now, I'll admit, out of all of them, this is the one that's the biggest stretch, but it fits my theory. Echo still has lingering thoughts of her past, and how violent and ruthless she was capable of being. I don't think she's necessarily afraid of herself, but what that level of anger can do to her mind. She's afraid of becoming an unfeeling psychopath, which manifests through voices in her head telling her to kill Amori.
I won't tolerate weakness.
Betray them all.
Don't you dare cry. A spy must carry out orders without question.
Bring me your head.
There is no room for
Echo, don't
doubt.
listen to him.
Bellamy is afraid of everyone he loves dying, so he tries to take out what he perceives as threats to those that he loves. Murphy has no fear, so he doesn't hallucinate. And even if we go back to the flashback, we can infer from what we've been shown that Josephine's father was afraid that everything he worked for would be taken from him in some way, so he tried to kill anyone who could stop his work. Finally, Clark is the most interesting one. Touching on what I mentioned earlier, she is afraid that everything everyone says about her is the truth, and that she is in fact the reason everyone died.
Your father died because he needed his little girl to know he was a good guy. Lexa died for the same reason. You infect people, Clark, and Maddie's next.
She wasn't preventing people's death, but causing it. Maybe inaction would have led her down a different path, and more people would have been alive. So from a narrative standpoint, the eclipse is heightening whatever their greatest anxiety is, which typically causes them to become violent in some capacity. I'm sure we'll learn what exactly is happening during the eclipse in terms of the story, and there might be things that happen in the future that prove this to not be totally accurate, but for now that's what I think is happening when they get taken over by the power of the eclipse. Back on the mothership, things go south as the hijacked transport docks. 4 masked invaders begin to use the gas canisters to knock out the crew and lock them in the mess, taking control of the ship. All except for Raven. Somehow they miss her and she makes it to Cryo, where she unlocks the only person who has taken control of the ship before, Dioza. This is a risky move, and the whole dynamic of things changes quickly now that she's in play. Dioza manages to take control of the bridge again, but not without the help of Maddie, a little violence, and some brutal negotiation techniques.
You have 3 seconds to decide how this ends. Either you stand down and we talk about being friends, or I kill the first hostage. 1, 2, 3. Bad choice.
Cold-blooded. Meanwhile, Octavia seems to be falling apart at the seams. She's smashing things, hurting herself, and provoking everyone around her. In one scene, she seems to try to do a kind of suicide by cop type of thing, where she basically just goads everyone into wanting to kill her. I guess she figures it will end her inner turmoil and allow everyone who is in the bunker to move on from the trauma of what they did. It makes sense that she would think that, but this is the 100. Nobody gets off that easy. Abby seems to be the one in charge now, with everyone else listening to her rather than Octavia.
Let her live with what she's become.
Perhaps a little bit of Cain is rubbing off on her. This is a really interesting dynamic for the group, and personally I like how subtle it's been with everything so far. I mean, we did have Octavia's monologue last episode, but aside from that, this feels like a slow burn that will continue for a little while. Once the ship is back under control, the final hijacker, who we learn is named Taylor, is taken prisoner. They all go down to Sanctum to investigate what happened to the others. Once they come up to the gate, Taylor lets them through, but not after she takes a moment to think about it. This is when they find Shaw's grave.
Who's Shaw? No! Let me go!
Raven is clearly not doing so good, but we leave her with a shot of her trying to process the information. I guess we'll find out her reaction to his death next episode. The show concludes with a couple mystery stingers, like why is Murphy covered in black veins? Does that have something to do with the eclipse? Also, who are all the kids? Where were they hiding? And why are they there? Taylor seems to know them, so she will most likely have some explaining to do. Well, that's it for this week, but before I go, I'll leave you with a thought that crossed my mind while I was making this episode. How do we know that the hallucinations are really over? Is what we're seeing now actually real? I guess we'll find out. Thanks for watching.
Don't make me gag you two.
Kinky.